Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone to our second day of Marxism Festival, online Marxism Festival, organised by and hosted by Socialist Workers Party. My name is Nimi Trivedi. I'm a member of Socialist Workers Party in Swansea, Wales, and I'll be chairing this session on Palestine, a revolutionary struggle against apartheid. So we are very pleased to have two speakers on the panel. Ilan Pappé, who is going to be our first speaker. Ilan is a renowned author and scholar who has spoken out on Palestine and crimes of the State of Israel and has written several books, including Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. So Ilan is going to be speaking first for about 15 minutes, followed by our second speaker, who is Anne Alexander, who's a member of Socialist Workers Party, and I'll introduce Anne just before she speaks. So just to remind everybody that once the two speakers have spoken, there will be plenty of time for discussion. If people can go to reactions and raise your virtual hands, and then I'll call people two at a time, people to speak for about 3 minutes from the floor before the speakers come back and sum up. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Ilan to start off the meeting, please. Thank you. If someone can unmute.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, you never learn it. Okay, I'll repeat. All I said was to thank you for inviting me, and it's a great pleasure to be part of this panel, and thank you everybody for watching and taking part in this important debate. It is first important to pay attention to the term apartheid. Because only defining it and its relevance to Palestine, we can talk better about the struggle or the revolutionary struggle against it. There are two kinds of apartheid. The specific ones in plural, that took place in places such as South Africa or the south of the United States, or under colonial rules in different parts of Asia and Africa. And there is the general term that lumps together all these historical cases and includes in it recently also the reality in Palestine. It was Desmond Tutu, after a visit to historical Palestine, that is to Palestine on both sides of the Green Line, who made the important reference to both kinds of apartheid when he said that in essence, the situation in Palestine, or historical Palestine, is a new variant of apartheid. It shares similarities with the other case studies, but it is also very different from them. Comparing it to South Africa, he noted that inside Israel, the apartheid is lesser in terms of abuse and inhumanity, but the one compared to the one that was in South Africa. But when looking at the occupied territories, he noted that it was worse on every level and aspect of life. There's another way to refer to apartheid in the context of Palestine, which has less to do with comparing the situation in Palestine to that in South Africa or other places where apartheid existed, but rather comparing the struggle against apartheid in South Africa to the struggle against apartheid in historical Palestine. This comparison of the struggles, rather than comparing the situation on the ground, has borne two important achievements, the BDS movement and the Israeli apartheid weeks in campuses all around the world. But this comparison also needs looking at. While boycotting South Africa played a very important role in bringing down apartheid there, this would not have been possible without the struggle, which included also armed struggle, led by the ANC, a body that had its internal divisions and tensions, but overcame them in the right historical moments. The Bantustans, unlike the Palestinian Authority, never claimed to be part of the struggle for liberation. Even the most harsh critics of the Palestinian Authority still know that it's part of the Fatah, and that the Fatah is still part of the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, which is an anomaly of being both part of the liberation struggle and at the same time the subcontractor of the occupation. Nothing like that happened anywhere else in the anti-colonialist struggles in the past. Defaming people as collaborators or complimenting them from being the true resistance or revolutionary movement is not working in Palestine. And if you use freely these binaries, it really means you have no idea about the complexity of the situation on the ground. Thus, this is a struggle that is a Janus with two faces. Remember the old statute. A clear, illuminated face of the Zionist project. I think never before were we able to unpack and expose in such clarity the real nature of Zionism and the role it plays today as a racist ideology of a powerful state intent on completing the crime against humanity it perpetrated in 1948. The hidden face of that Janus is a face of the resistance to that state and that ideology. It has incredible stories of bravery and commitment of a daily basis of people fighting for their rights under the risk of being killed, wounded, banished, and in the process leading to similar treatment to all of their family members or the whole village or neighborhood in which they live, at the hands of a state that violates systematically the international law and people's basic human rights. As we can see in Jerusalem and on the fence of Gaza today, particularly today and yesterday, even without leadership and organization, these brave people succeeded temporarily to preserve a modicum of rights of faith and habitation and living, but even they could not stop the overall ethnic cleansing of Greater Jerusalem or the ethnic cleansing that takes place in Area C or in the Nakab, and these actions do not end the siege of Gaza or the suffering of the Palestinian refugees. Like the BDS and the Israeli apartheid week, these impressive achievements are not enough to change the reality on the ground. And I'm not underrating these successes for a moment. They change, especially I'm talking about those now outside of Palestine, the BDS and the apartheid week. They change the discourse on Palestine. They turn campuses around the world to sites of solidarity and intersectional activity with other oppressed groups, from African Americans to the ethnic and cultural minorities in Britain, and with indigenous and workers' struggles and movements around the world. It exposed, this kind of activity has already exposed the role of multinational corporations dealing with arms, surveillance, technology, and recently pharmacy and pharmaceutical products and medicine, which are constantly ruling our lives with and showing the connection between these mammoth organizations and the oppression of the Palestinians. Exposing these connections between the exploitation in your own country in the past and in the present continues and continuing to make Israel a pariah state and pressuring government to change their policies is a blessed solidarity activity that of course should go on. But we have to remember, and I think that's the moment where we always reach a debate, and it's an important debate, and I think it's the 5th or 6th time that I participate in the Marxism to date, and it always comes up in the discussion, and it's an important discussion. But I think what we keep forgetting is that we are not synchronized, and we cannot be synchronized with developments on the ground, which was not the situation for the solidarity movement with many of the liberation movements in the Third World. This is very unique in modern history. We are not synchronized and cannot be synchronized with developments on the ground. Developments without which Palestine will not be liberated. Palestinian unity, deserting the two-state paradigm, dismantling structures such as the PA that perpetuate the colonization rather than ending them, coupled with the struggle against authoritarianism in the Arab world and for social and economic justice there, so that governments will reflect the Arab civil society long commitment to Palestine and the Palestinians. All these developments, which haven't happened yet, coupled with a clear strategy, clear Palestinian strategy for decolonization and liberation in the 21st century. If all this is not going to happen, then it will not happen by even the most successful and intensive solidarity activity originating in London or New York. It all has to happen on the ground, and probably the framework which We don't have to invent the wheel. It's very clear that we are looking for some sort of a liberation movement that puts the one democratic state at its center and then builds the strategy of how to get there. Well, we are not synchronized in that respect, but at the level of activity on the ground, or the level of bravery of individuals on the ground, with that kind of historical process that is not happening as yet. So we cannot synchronize yet our solidarity activity with the development on the ground, however, will happen. We will be synchronized. I'm sure about it. It's a matter of time, and the moment will come. We need to put our faith in a society, the Palestinian society, one of the youngest in the world, educated, assertive, and one which is able to communicate in a way the fragmented Palestinian society was unable to do before. It is a matter of time before the good work invested in the solidarity from the outside would fuse with developments on the ground to become a transformative factor or force of decolonization and liberation. And there is still so much to do before that moment of synchronization arrives from the outside. We do not have the mainstream media. We do not have the mainstream academia and politics with us. Far from that. Whether we try to influence it from within or from without, we are facing accusations of anti-Semitism and a coalition of unsavory forces. We still need to do more so that when the moment of synchronizing arrives, we are there in a better, more powerful, and more effective way. So I will highlight, and with this I will conclude, what the Palestinians, I will not highlight what the Palestinians should do, which I'm trying myself to contribute on the ground through a new initiative called the One Democratic State Initiative, a movement that requests an open discussion, first and foremost in the Palestinian political scene and the Palestinian society, to discuss the One Democratic State solution and the ways of achieving it, and also tries, but it's not a priority for us, but we think it is necessary also to find whether there are any partners for such a discussion within the Jewish society in Israel. Now, the struggle against apartheid from the outside will be successful if we will be aware that these terms do not describe fully what we are struggling against. It is a struggle against genocide in Gaza, a harsh military rule and occupation in areas A and B in the West Bank, a vigilante harassment with the help of the state that has already caused ethnic cleansing in Area C, 60% of the West Bank. It is a racist legislation inside Israel, expropriation of land, and encouraging the transformation of Palestinian towns and villages inside Israel, trying to transform them into sites of criminal activity. We need to study these realities from the outside, report them, demand accountability, transparency in the legal field, in the media, in the local and national politics. It is not the soundbite of apartheid that would do the job, but the exposure of its daily manifestation that we should insist on, despite the fact that we are facing a callous campaign of silencing, intimidation, and no less important, indifference. So we are part of the struggle against apartheid. Maybe we're even part of a revolutionary struggle against apartheid, but not only against apartheid, against settler colonialism, fascism, racism, ethnic cleansing, and oppression that takes place not just in Palestine, but in so many other parts of the world. And being part of the solidarity movement with these other struggles enhances and empowers the solidarity with the Palestinians on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilan. Thank you very much for that brilliant introduction to this meeting. We have over 300 people who are participating in this meeting, which is absolutely superb. So if you would like to contribute, please, as I introduce my next speaker and as Anne is speaking, please raise your hand so you can be called for, for your contributions. So Anne Alexander is a member of Socialist Workers Party in North London and a founder member of the Middle East North African Solidarity Network, and is also an activist in UCU. So Anne is going to speak for roughly about 15 minutes as well. Take it away, Anne.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to Ilan for a brilliant exposition of a revolutionary perspective on the struggle against the Israeli apartheid regime. And there's much in what Ilan said that I absolutely agree with. But I'm going to outline a slightly different emphasis, I think, in terms of the analysis that I'm going to put forward, which I think will open up, I hope, a fruitful debate and discussion around this very important question. So I want to sort of basically pick out three areas to talk about here. First is the question which, you know, is central to any struggle of knowing your enemy, knowing the nature of what it is that you're fighting. Then I'm going to talk about finding your friends, who the allies of the Palestinian struggle for liberation I believe the most important allies are, and what the historical experience of my reading of the historical experience of Palestinian struggles is. And then I want to talk about the tactics that I think are the most important to discuss in dialogue with Palestinian activists, and to be, as we are engaged in solidarity, unconditional solidarity with the immensely courageous and steadfast Palestinian struggles on the ground against occupation, against oppression, and so on. That this is an area where we can debate, discuss, and come out stronger and learn from each other. I would argue that there are sets of tactics and models of struggle which build on the strengths, the massive strengths of the Palestinian struggle, rather than the objective weaknesses. And I agree totally with Ilan that we actually have to outline an analysis that looks at these objective weaknesses and strengths and measures them up, and focuses on what we can do to help that victory that we know must come out of this struggle. So in terms of the question about knowing your enemy, I very much agree with a large part of what Ilan outlined in terms of the label of an apartheid regime or practices of apartheid and so on actually needs to be made concrete and to be discussed in a way that fits with what Israel's real role in the imperial order in the Middle East. I'm going to pick out a few key features which I think are important to throw down into the discussion, which I think are also central questions in terms of the tactics and strategy for revolutionaries related to this question. First is that I would say that Israel's niche role in this, in the imperialist system in the Middle East, this is a military colony and not the classic model of settler colonialism in the region, or in fact more generally, that there is a specific role that the Israeli economy today is very much tied up with the military alliance between the Israeli armed forces. I mean, and I don't know if Ilan would agree with this, but I think you could very much characterize Israel as an army with a state rather than the other way around, that the armed bodies of men are more than usually overbearing and dominant in the way that Israel functions as a state and in the political economy of Israel, particularly actually since in the last kind of 20-30 years. And this requires an understanding of imperialism, which sees that imperialism after the Second World War functioned differently to imperialism before, even if the genesis is the same, even if they're both rooted in the competitive dynamics of capitalism. And it was predicated on the creation of a hierarchy of states and independent centres of capital accumulation, not the classic model of European colonialism, which depended much more on retarding and holding back the development of the bourgeoisie outside the historic core of the capitalist system. So Israel's basic role in constructing the US-dominated imperialist architecture of the Middle East was to exercise military discipline over other prospective independent centres of capital accumulation and ensure they entered this hierarchy of states on terms set by the US. 1967, I would argue, is a pivotal moment in this process, though obviously it builds on and could not happen without the catastrophe of 1948. It was 1967 which cemented the alliance between the Israeli military, the state it built, and the US. There was a huge acceleration of US military aid and economic support poured in for the next 4 decades, a massive investment by the US ruling class in creating a high-tech military colony, a garrison town, a watchdog state, as John Rose noted. This is structured into the relationship between the US ruling class and the and Israel through, in recent years, through memoranda of understanding, which have set the terms of the massive transfers of military technology, weapons, collaboration in terms of building the what's called Israel's qualitative military edge. This is a bipartisan affair. It is not only a pet project of the Republican Party. It is also, in fact, the first of these major memoranda of understanding was set up by Clinton, then it was followed by Bush, it was then followed by Obama. The one that Obama signed is the one that has been governed the most recent massive transfers, continuing transfers of funding and military technology. But military discipline was never just about fighting wars. It was one facet of a much bigger system. The essential principles were that Israel would retain this kind of what's called qualitative military edge over other junior partners in the system. The pillars of those junior partnerships, the other states that the US has tried systematically to build long-term relationships with, have been Turkey, which is a NATO ally for decades, and the Gulf, Saudi Arabia and the UAE currently. Iran, of course, was the other prop of this structure, but succumbed to popular revolution in 1979. And I'd say here that Iran remains a sub-imperial power in the region, nevertheless, just one that is opposed to the US and rather than allied with it. So that, in a sense, I think is the framework in which we have to fit the questions of who are the friends of the Palestinian struggle for liberation and what tactics and strategy would flow from that analysis. So I would argue, of course, it would flow from this that no portion of the US ruling class is any kind of ally in this struggle. But it also follows that none of the regional states can be relied on either. Those which are not allies of the US have an equally disastrous record of suppression of Palestinian organization, perpetuation of the marginalization and oppression of Palestinian refugees, and the instrumentalization of Palestinian struggle for their own purposes. I mean, the Syrian regime is a classic example of this. I would argue, though, and I think that Ilan would agree with this, is that the vast majority of ordinary people across the Middle East, and especially in the states immediately bordering Palestine, do have a strategic interest in the dismantling of this regional architecture of domination, because it is a material and ideological factor in their own suppression by the various murderous regimes in power. This is why solidarity with the struggle for Palestine appears time and time again as an accelerant in the internal struggles against these regimes over such a long historical period, and why the historic nationalist leadership of the Palestinian movement had to fight so hard to try and break the connection between these two parallel and often intersecting struggles for justice. So you look at the history of the struggle in Lebanon and Jordan in the late 1960s into the early 1970s, when the struggle against the regimes in power there went in parallel with the development of the Palestinian revolutionary movement and the beginning and the armed struggle that was carrying on at that period. Or if you look at Tunisia and Egypt, where if you ask Tunisian and Egyptian activists what was the genesis, if you like, the political genesis of the struggles that would then culminate in the revolutions of 2011, actually they will quite often mention the question of Palestine. That Ariel Sharon's invitation to the Information Society Summit by Ben Ali, the dictator in Tunisia in 2005, was a key organising moment for activists across the Tunisian trade union movement, for example, who used the struggle for Palestine as a way of starting to rebuild their political capacity to act independently of the trade union bureaucracy. It was also an absolutely key solidarity with the Second Intifada in Palestine in the early 2000s played a key role in the Egyptian struggle. It initiated a wave of popular protests, which brought some of the, in fact, as school students, some of the generation of people who would lead the struggles of revolutionary struggles a decade later, gave them their first taste of mass collective action. If you look at the more recent waves of revolutions and uprisings in the Middle East, you find again in the case of Algeria, the Algerian regime that has faced this massive wave of popular protests and struggles from below over the last couple of years, had to ban the Palestinian flag alongside banning the Amazigh flag from demonstrations, and to persecute people for carrying it, because they realised that the popularity of the Palestinian cause and the way in which the ordinary people engaged in this struggle against the regime see an echo of their struggle in what's happening in Palestine, and understand the deep connections. And so this brings me on to really the kind of final sort of element in the analysis I want to put forward, which is to ask the question: what are the tactics which build on the strengths of the the Palestinian situation, the situation gives to the Palestinians, and the experiences of liberatory struggle, which the Palestinian movement have built over many decades. I think any analysis of this has to include an assessment of where there are objective weaknesses, and I would argue that the kind of military colony model of Israeli version of apartheid means that the Israeli economy does not depend in the same way as the South African economy did on the labour of the black working class. So that Palestinian labour has been marginalised and excluded, particularly from the high-tech industries, which have become much more central to the Israeli economy since the 1990s, and are actually the Palestinians withdrawing their labour from those sectors is not possible. They're not there. This is very different to South Africa, where in fact it was the black working class in the mines, and the platinum mines and the gold mines in South Africa, absolutely one of the motors of the confrontation with the apartheid state, which rendered it unstable and opened up the possibility for the ANC to lead that political struggle towards democracy. So taking into account of that, I think we then have to look at the potential of where the struggle could go otherwise. And I think that means drawing on the modes and forms of struggle that make possible the fusion between the political aspect of the struggle for liberation in Palestine, the fight for democracy, the fight for civil rights, the fight against oppression, the fight against racism, with the social power that is located in much broader than the borders of historic Palestine itself, in the class dimension of that struggle, the social class dimension of that struggle, that ordinary people with the working class, the organised working class at their heart, have, as I said, an interest in dismantling this system of domination and oppression. And that's where we come to the questions of the revolutions of the last decade. Now, it might seem strange to sit here and talk about the possibilities of revolutionary strategy in the wake of such terrible defeats, but I do believe that actually what we've seen in the last decade is that we have entered an age of popular revolution, both in the Middle East and beyond, and that the contradictions and that led to the explosion of those massive revolutionary movements have not gone away. What is crucial, I think, is the fusion of those struggles, and that there are ways and means for activists who are mobilising in solidarity for Palestine outside the borders of Palestine, but in the wider Middle East, have an organic connection to the Palestinian movements, the Palestinian struggles, and that they can, as Ilan put it, their synchronization of their struggles is the one that will really undo this machinery of oppression and domination. Final point really is about what we can do though outside, and again I think I would agree with Ilan's point that we have to continue to build a movement in solidarity with the Palestinian struggle. We have a historic responsibility in this country because of the role of British colonialism in incubating the Israeli state in the first place, but also because of the ongoing role of our own ruling class in supporting the US. So we absolutely have to continue that struggle. We stand in solidarity with the Palestinians as they resist the ongoing effects of settler colonialism. And we will fight to make spaces for ourselves to discuss these and to build solidarity in our universities, in our workplaces, and across the world. Thank you.